Solving a right triangle. All right, so when you have a right triangle, there's a relationship between the sides and these other two angles here. So when you're trying to solve for a triangle, you need to know this relationship, SOHCAHTOA. Now, there's several ways to remember that, but this is something you need to know when you're doing trigonometry problems here. So this means the sine of the angle is equal to the opposite side over the hypotenuse, and there's the opposite side and the hypotenuse. Okay, so the cosine of the angle equals the adjacent side over the hypotenuse. That's what that means. And the tangent of an angle equals the opposite side over the adjacent side. Okay, so this helps you to recall this information or these formulas. Now, when you're talking about a right triangle, the side opposite the 90-degree angle is always the hypotenuse. Now, if we're talking about this is our angle theta here, then this would be the adjacent side, and the side opposite is the opposite side. The hypotenuse is never considered the adjacent side. Okay, so if we were taking this angle here as theta, then this would be the adjacent side, and A would be the opposite side. All right, so in this example, we're given this angle 50 degrees here, and this side 17. Okay, so to find the information, we're going to use this adjacent side and this angle. The first thing I would do would be to go ahead and calculate this other angle, and that's because it's one of the easiest things to do. All the angles in a triangle add up to 180. So if you subtract this 90-degree angle from it, it gives you 90 degrees. You can take your 90 degrees and subtract the angle measure given, and that gives you your angle A value. Okay, so that's going to be 40 degrees. Now what I would do is I would use this 50-degree angle and the 17 whenever I'm calculating my other values, and I would do that because what's going to happen is if you do make a calculation error in one part, it's not going to affect the second value that you're finding here. So, and let's go ahead and calculate C first. It doesn't really matter. Okay, so this would be the hypotenuse and the adjacent side. So remember, SOHCAHTOA. Okay, so this is going to be adjacent and hypotenuse. So I'm going to do cosine. Cosine of my angle, which is 50 degrees, equals my adjacent side, right? Adjacent over hypotenuse. So that's 17 over C. Okay, so now I have this equation. Well, how do I solve this equation for C? Well, C is in the denominator, so that's the first thing I need to do is get it out of the denominator. So I'd multiply both sides of my equal sign by C. These will cancel out over here. And that's going to leave me with C times the cosine of 50 degrees equals 17. Well, I can get C by itself by dividing both sides by cosine of 50. So that's going to give me C equals 17 over the cosine of 50 degrees. And I'm going to plug that into my calculator. So I'm going to show you how to use the ALEKS calculator for that problem. Now, we want to make sure that it's in degrees because I'm calculating the cosine of a degree. So that's all good. And so I'm going to take 17 and I'm going to divide it by cosine of 50 degrees. And then equals. And this gives me my value for C, and it asks me to round my answer to the nearest tenth. So C is approximately 26.4. Right, we can see that I rounded that correctly. I want to round to the nearest tenth, so I only look to the digit to the right. And that digit is less than 5, so it stays a 4. All right, so now let's follow the same kind of process and solve for B. So let's look at, if I have 50 degrees, again, we know 17 is adjacent, B is opposite. So opposite and adjacent would be tangent, And so I'm going to say tangent of 50 degrees equals the opposite side, which is b, over the adjacent side, which is 17. And so basically, how do I solve this equation for b? Well, I need to get rid of the 17. So b is divided by 17, so I multiply both sides by 17. These cancel out, and it's going to leave me with the equation 17 times tangent of 50 degrees. And so now I'm going to plug that into my ALEKS calculator. So I'm going to say 17 times tangent of 50 degrees. And that equals 20 point, and I'm going to round that 2 up to a 3 since the digit to the right of it is a 5 or bigger. So it's going to be 20.3. So when you enter that in ALEKS, would go ahead and enter for angle A, 40 degrees. For side B, that was 20.3. And for side C, that was going to be 26.4. And that's your answer. All right, so here's another example. So remember to find the angle here. All the angles in a triangle add up to 180, so you subtract 90 from that and you get 90. So then you can take 90 that's left over and subtract the 40.2, and that gives you this angle here. So 90 minus 40.2 is going to give us a 49.8 degrees. And this is angle A measure. Okay, now let's go ahead and calculate side A. So side A is adjacent to this angle, and we also were given the opposite side length. So let's see, let's write this out. So ka toa, and here we have the adjacent and the opposite side, and so that's going to be tangent. So I'm going to set up a tangent equation. Tangent of 40.2 equals the side opposite, which is 20, over the side adjacent, which is A. Now I need to solve this equation for A, and A is in the denominator, so remember to do that. We multiply each side of the equation by A, and the A's will cancel out over here on the right, and that leaves me with 20. And so now to get A by itself, I'm going to divide both sides by the tangent of 40.2. And so I get 20 divided by tangent of 40.2. If you put that in your calculator, you get your approximate value for A, and we're going to round to the nearest tenth. Remember, that's the first digit to the right of the decimal. So this is going to end up rounding to 23.7. Now we need to solve for C. And so C is the hypotenuse. And so the hypotenuse and the side we were originally given, which is the opposite side. So opposite and hypotenuse, that is going to be sine. So we're going to take the sine of our angle, 40.2. We're going to set that equal to the opposite side, which is 20, over the hypotenuse, which is C. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and multiply both sides by C so we can get C out of the denominator here. And then we're going to go ahead and divide both sides by the sine of 40.2. Now when we plug that into our calculator and round to our nearest tenth, we get 31.0. And that's our value for C.